David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the show. We're sort of crossing the Rubicon, in a sense, on the topic of impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. We have a new poll up on the community tab of the David Pakman Show YouTube channel asking what you think is going to happen. But we now have sitting senators who are calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump, not just at political events, but on the Senate floor. And I'm talking about Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is also running for president for the Democratic nomination in 2020. We've heard it from the House, but this is a much bigger deal because sitting active members of the Senate saying on the Senate floor that it's time for impeachment proceedings against the president of the United States to start is very different than a member of the House who, with peace and love, we respect and understand are important members of the American political establishment. This is a senator during live speeches on the House of the Senate. Take a look at Elizabeth Warren yesterday.
There's enough here to bring an impeachment proceeding. And for us, for this body, for Congress, to back up from that and to say that protecting the president is more important than protecting the Constitution is not only wrong, it is a violation of our oath of office. I'm here to say one more time publicly, this is not a fight I wanted to take on, but this is the fight in front of us now. This is not about politics. This is about the Constitution of the United States of America. We took an oath not to try to protect Donald Trump. We took an oath to protect and serve the Constitution of the United States of America. And the way we do that is we begin impeachment proceedings now against this president. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Sitting senators calling for impeachment of a sitting president is a big deal. Don't let, Trump will frame this as, who knows, wacky Pocahontas or whatever he likes to say about Elizabeth Warren. Remember how badly Republicans hated Barack Obama? I mean, deeply. They hated him, but they knew he didn't actually do anything worthy of impeachment. You had Senator John Kyle, who said about President Obama, impeachment is always a possibility, but no one is talking about that. He said that on a radio show about Barack Obama. You had Senator James Inhofe, who's out of his mind, who said Obama could be impeached over the supposed Benghazi cover-up. Turns out there was no such cover-up, and no one actually tried to impeach President Obama for that. No senators actually tried to do that. Senator Tom Coburn, during the Obama era, said in a political setting, Obama is getting close to having done enough to justify impeachment. It wasn't true, but that was at a town hall meeting. It wasn't on the floor of the Senate. If you go back to George W. Bush, for example, I mean, no senators, Democratic or Republican, were saying it's time to impeach George W. Bush. And the reason why is that senators on the floor of the Senate don't say that a president should be impeached if they actually haven't done anything worthy of it. Democratic Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, though, is taking a bit of a different approach. She is further resisting impeachment. She says Trump is goading us to impeach him, and then it would actually help Donald Trump to solidify his base. Now, I hate to break it to Nancy Pelosi, but Donald Trump's base is very solid, right? 28% of the country has already said they're definitely voting for Donald Trump in 2020. His base isn't moving, but that's more of a political calculation that Nancy Pelosi seems to be making. Elizabeth Warren is laying it out in clearer terms. This is not about politics. This is about facts and the law and the Constitution. The question of the political strategy is a legitimate one. And I think it's actually a question as to whether it is good political strategy to try to impeach Donald Trump. But the actions at this point are there. That's the reality. Now, that being said, no one should jump the gun on impeachment. Step one is just debate on the floor of the House of Representatives. That is just the first step here. Trump's administration won't even comply with the most minor oversight requests for records, for documents, for testimony. That is part of the obstruction for which this House floor debate on impeachment actually should be happening. Start the debate. Have the debate about impeachment in the House. Use that to gather evidence. Use that to publicize what it is that has been done. Use it to get people to understand what's in the Mueller report, because as I've said before, too many Americans simply haven't read the Mueller report, and they're operating sort of under the guise of this no collusion, no obstruction PR campaign meme that Donald Trump and William Barr have pretty damn successfully mounted. So start the debate and use the debate in the House to collect the evidence, go where the evidence takes you. But it is time to formally start the impeachment debate on the floor of the House of Representatives, period. Get Robert Mueller to the House and have him answer the question, would Donald Trump be facing criminal obstruction charges if he was not president of the United States? Mueller will, of course, give a diplomatic, non-committal answer and say, oh, that's a hypothetical. But he won't be able to say no. The president would not be facing obstruction charges if he were not president of the United States, because the answer is yes. Trump would be indicted for obstruction if he were not a sitting president. Good for Elizabeth Warren for calling it for what it is. Let's now see if other senators join her. There are other senators, Democratic senators, who are running for president. Some of them have said in non-Senate settings that they believe that the time, at least for the debate about impeachment, is here. Let's hear from Kamala Harris on the floor of the Senate. Let's hear from Cory Booker on the floor of the Senate and see if we can get multiple sitting senators saying in open Senate session, it is time to start impeachment proceedings, if not at least impeachment debate about the president of the United States. Do not let Trump trick you into believing that this is just no big deal. This is very rare. This doesn't often happen during in American politics to presidents of the United States. It's a big deal, and we're going to be paying attention to it. We just got a bunch of Donald Trump's tax filings, and they're stunning. And these are not like full. I think before we go any further, I should remind you, these are not the tax returns. These are not like the much coveted recent personal tax returns that Congress is trying to get from the Treasury. These are filings from 1985 to 1994 for Donald Trump. But what they reveal is absolutely fascinating. You'll remember that Donald Trump ran on being a great business person and a deal maker. And in fact, if you take that away, if you question Donald Trump's credentials as a great business person and a deal maker, the guy has no credentials of any kind. It's sort of scary. Whether being a good deal maker makes you a good president is an open question. But if you take that pseudo credential away, there's nothing there at all. But then you might remember that during the 2016 campaign, people started rightly bringing up, wait a second, hold on. Your businesses have filed for bankruptcy many times. Are you actually the great business person you claim to be? And Trump's explanation at the time was, that's because I was using bankruptcy as a strategic tool to my advantage. It wasn't because my businesses were failing businesses. It wasn't that I made bad deals. When my businesses declared bankruptcy, I was intelligently taking advantage of bankruptcy protection. There is a fantastic new report in the New York Times which tells us that that's very, very much untrue. It looked at Donald Trump's 1040, which is the primary federal tax form from 1985 to 1994, and it is painting a very different picture of Trump than genius businessman, which is what he has been touting for years now. Over the 10-year period that the New York Times reviewed, Donald Trump reported $1.17 billion in losses. This was not common with high net worth taxpayers at the time, who would be taking strategic losses for in order to gain tax advantages. Trump's losses were outliers at the time. They were extraordinarily big, and they were genuine business losses. These were not strategic write-downs or write-offs or use of sophisticated accounting measures. And in fact, you know how Trump said that finding ways to avoid paying taxes would make him smart? There was nothing smart about this. Trump avoided federal income taxes for 8 of the 10 years that were reviewed, not because of tricky or sophisticated accounting maneuvers. He straight up lost a ton of money and therefore avoided paying taxes during 8 of the 10 years that the New York Times reviewed. And more importantly, Donald Trump's staff have been continuing to tell massive and demonstrably false lies about all of this. The New York Times was working on this story, so they went to Donald Trump's team to get a comment about what they had uncovered. And a senior official said to them, quote, "The president got massive depreciation and tax shelter because of large-scale construction and subsidized developments. That is why the president has always scoffed at the tax system and said you need to change the tax laws. You can make a large income and not have to pay a large amount of taxes." This is just not true, okay? This, again, makes it sound like tax sheltering and subsidies and depreciation losses created on paper losses for Trump, which allowed him to really intelligently avoid taxes during 8 of those 10 years. Those are flat out lies. And in fact, a lawyer for Donald Trump put out a statement saying that what the New York Times is claiming about Trump is, quote, demonstrably false. But when that lawyer was asked, well, what's an example of something that's demonstrably false? If it's demonstrably false, demonstrate that it's false. And Trump's lawyer was unable to actually cite a single specific claim that is demonstrably false. So what we've learned here is that Donald Trump's tax avoidance during these specific years was not this enlightened, proactive tax strategy. It was indicative of an unstable and poorly run business that was losing actual money, period. Now, with Trump, there's always usually lurking in the background a dose of hypocrisy that we can often find if we look at his tweets. And in fact, Trump tweeted in 2012 that, quote, "Half of Americans don't pay income tax despite crippling government debt, as if they're bad people." Well, Trump was one of those people for 8 of the 10 years that the New York Times reviewed in the mid-'80s and the mid-'90s. And if we ever actually got Donald Trump's more recent tax returns, my guess is we would find out that he was also one of those people not paying federal taxes at the same time that he sent a tweet criticizing that, quote, "nearly half of Americans don't pay income tax." This morning, Trump, clearly rattled by this, put out a tweet, actually a 2-tweet word salad, which read, quote, "Real estate developers in the 1980s and 1990s, more than 30 years ago, were entitled to massive write-offs and depreciation, which would, if one was actively building, show losses and tax losses in almost all cases. Much was non-monetary, sometimes considered tax shelter. You would get it by building or even buying. You always wanted to show losses for tax purposes. Almost all real estate developers did, and often renegotiate with banks. It was sport. Additionally, the very old information put out is a highly inaccurate fake news hit job." Almost everything he said in there was not true. The sort of common nature of what was revealed in Trump's tax filings is not actually common. The idea that Donald Trump's losses were only on paper losses for the reasons he's citing is not true. I mean, none of this is true. It's certainly not fake news. And it's actually been confirmed by looking at the tax filings of his dad, Fred Trump, at the time. They were involved in a lot of the same projects financially, and everything absolutely matches up. So why do we care about this? We care about this because, number one, Trump has gone crazy to prevent his more recent tax returns from being released. And now we have proof that Trump has lied about his tax history. He lies and his advisors lie about the characterization of why he shows losses on many years. And we know that it's very, very likely on this basis that Donald Trump is just not nearly as rich as he has claimed to be. He's an egomaniac. That would upset him if it were confirmed. But maybe more importantly, people this far in the red, people who are losing this much money, are subject to, are easier to manipulate and to take advantage of, which is exactly what many of the investigations into Trump are looking at. Russian oligarchs laundering money through Trump's businesses over the more recent years. The problems with sketchy Deutsche Bank dealings. Saudis using Trump's properties to launder money. Later on today, I'm going to tell you about a connection to the second in command in Nicolas Maduro's regime involved in real estate purchases from Trump organization businesses. And lastly, if you look into the detail of this investigation, you can pick almost any number that is in the tax filings and investigate it, and you might find something sketchy. Like, for example, in '89, there was a $52 million interest payment. What is that? That number alone might have an entire history behind it, which could be anything. It could be nothing, or it could be more sketchy and strange behavior. We need Trump's more recent tax returns. Hopefully Democrats in the House can get them sooner than later so that we can actually learn the full scope of this. And most Americans want to see those tax returns. Every other candidate in the last 40 years has released their tax returns. We've got to see them, and hopefully the House Ways and Means Committee will ultimately be able to get them. What do you think is the most notable thing about Trump's 85 to 94 taxes? I'm on Twitter. Let me know at @dpacman. And the show is also on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Sean Parnell. Sean, thank you. Really appreciate your support. And I also want to say thanks to Tyrone Moody, who is today's longtime all-star, really great person, sustaining member of the day. Tyrone has been a member dating all the way back to 2014. That's almost 5 years of membership. Sean, Tyrone, thank you. The program is mostly funded by members like Sean and Tyrone. You can join them in under 1 minute. You can sign up at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code available. This is 2020. All one word, all lowercase, will save you 40%. You get 100% of the benefits at a 40% discount, including the daily bonus show. Much more about that later on in the program. Okay, it's time for Hatriot Mail. Hatriot Mail is when a professional voiceover artist does readings of Hatriot Mail that I get. A very special Hatriot Mail today, but before we get into that, just a quick reminder of what Hatriot Mail is.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Okay, so this week's Hatriot Mail is extraordinarily disturbing, as are most of them, but it actually includes a sort of hearkening back to one of my favorite video games growing up. Didn't play a lot of video games growing up, but I loved the Mario series, and there is a probably offensive to Italian people reference to that game in this week's Hatriot Mail. Take a listen to this.
It's me, MAGA Mario Pakman. It's a sissy boy that likes a chasing a ghost. David, please look at the mirror. That is the most moronic face ever live. His name is David Pakman. You know exactly right, the left are got drain. MAGA 2020. Trump is the answer to unhinged leftism.
I've got to hand it to them. It's a little bit clever, and the great interpretive reading from Hatriot Mail guy makes it a lot more clever, but it doesn't change the fact that Hatriots hate it when the David Pakman Show does well. And one of the ways you can really anger the Hatriots is by signing up for a membership at davidpakman.com/membership using the coupon code Hatriot40, HATRIOT 40. That saves you 40%. And it's like a double middle finger to the Hatriots. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. Okay, this is a very interesting story, and there's a couple different elements to it which I want to talk about. To kind of set the stage, many of you know that there's currently a crisis in Venezuela, and it involves the despotic, authoritarian autocrat Nicolas Maduro. And as a principled progressive, I want the United States to stay absolutely out of Venezuela. And I also want Nicolas Maduro to go, who has ravaged the country. And I want an actual democratic leader, not a puppet of the United States, to come to power and to start working on the difficult problems that Venezuela has to solve for itself. That's my view because I'm a progressive. But in the middle of all of this, there are lots of politics to be sorted out. And one of those elements relates to American companies doing business with the Maduro regime. It relates to hypocrisies of individual American elected officials. There are all sorts of other political issues that are in the mix here. The geopolitical implications of Russia's perspective on what's going on in Venezuela, the Cuban component and the possible legality or illegality of Cuban involvement in Venezuela for a long time, which is another issue that there's some really smart pieces out there that I recommend you read. But in a totally sort of stunning, but also not altogether surprising revelation, given that Trump is involved with all sorts of dirty players, the Miami Herald is now reporting that Donald Trump's company sold a luxury property in the Dominican Republic to a shell company apparently tied to the Nicolas Maduro regime of Venezuela. And specifically who we're talking about is the second most powerful person in the Maduro government. His name is Diosdado Cabello, or as we would say in Argentina, Cabello, who is under U.S. sanctions personally for allegedly trafficking drugs and laundering money. Now, I will make it abundantly clear, it's not believed that this transaction would rise to the level of criminality because it allegedly took place in 2015 when this individual was not yet under sanctions. But I don't even actually care so much about the brazen double standards. Understand that Trump considers meddling in Venezuela against the Maduro regime as president. And just years ago, he was selling property to people associated with the Maduro regime. We're accustomed to the double standards. There is boundless hypocrisy. It's sort of pedestrian and boring at this point. And we know that Republicans and Trumpists don't care about the hypocrisy and double standards of Donald Trump. So it's like barely even worth discussing. The story here is that this is not rare. What I mean by that is Donald Trump is involved in all sorts of sketchy financial transactions, presumed money laundering of all kinds, for individuals in countries that are under sanction at this point in time. So remember, the Trump organization participated in what they appear to have known was a money laundering operation involving a branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that worked on getting components for weapons of mass destruction. So again, Iran is terrible, even though they didn't actually violate any of the provisions of the Iran deal that they signed with President Obama. We're out of the Iran deal. Screw Iran. But Trump's organization reportedly involved in a money laundering scheme for the people who are obtaining or working to obtain and develop weapons of mass destruction in Iran. Total blatant hypocrisy. Also not rare. Trump has done this before. There's an article in the New Yorker from 2 years ago called Donald Trump's Worst Deal, which outlines a lot of the comings and goings of that Iranian National Guard, Revolutionary Guard fiasco. There are endless projects where Trump and his kids have misled buyers about real estate deals. Look, for example, at the ProPublica article from 2018 called "Here Are the Trump Projects Where Ivanka and Her Dad Misled Buyers." This is a scamster criminal who is in the White House. So, of course, there are dozens of stories like this. And it's not surprising that it involves Russian oligarchs tied to Putin. As I told you earlier in the program, it involves the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And now it reportedly involves Nicolas Maduro's number two guy. We could go even further. I could talk to you in detail, and I think maybe we have discussed this on the program, about the fiasco in Baku, Azerbaijan, which we could do an entire show about what went on with Trump's dealings there. Trump has likely been a criminal as long as he's been a player in New York and world real estate. And if there's anything good that comes from the Donald Trump presidency, because it's basically all bad, it would be that maybe it will expose the level of criminality that Donald Trump's business has been involved in. And if we're lucky, it doesn't seem like this is definitely going to be the case, but if we're lucky, maybe all of these investigations and revelations that come from the spotlight being on Donald Trump as president of the United States, maybe it will let us pierce the kleptocracy that Donald Trump and the people around him have perpetuated. And maybe somebody will be held accountable at some point for some small piece of these misdeeds that, again, are not rare in the sense that it's not just Trump that does this stuff. Most of the people that do the shady business that Trump has been doing for decades are sort of smart enough, quite frankly, to realize that running for elected office, running for anything where there would be an expectation that you would disclose your full finances, where there would be a spotlight and a magnifying glass placed on what you've been doing in business and professionally, most super rich dudes like Trump recognize they shouldn't go anywhere near politics because this is exactly the type of thing that could happen. We've got an opportunity now with Donald Trump to actually hold one of these sort of gilded families accountable for stuff that tons of rich dudes and gals are doing and have been doing and almost always are not held accountable for. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show while you're there. Follow me. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break, and we have so much more still upcoming on today's show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program today Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, who's a staff reporter with the Oregonian in Portland. You might remember that he recently joined us to talk about a story that he's been following for some time now involving Saudi nationals who in the United States are accused of crimes, sometimes arrested, and they disappear. And he'll tell us what we mean by disappear specifically. Before they actually face justice. So, Shane, first of all, great to have you back on. Catch us up on what we discussed last time to get everybody up to speed, if you will.
David, thanks so much for having me back on your show. So as you mentioned, for the last few months, I've been working on an investigative series here at the Oregonian, looking into cases where Saudi nationals, most of them attending university here in the United States, have been charged with serious crimes ranging from manslaughter to rape to possession of child pornography. And these individuals, a growing number of them, have managed to disappear while facing prosecution. Essentially, these individuals have been charged with crimes. They end up posting bail, have been retained private attorneys, and then as they're moving close to trial, a number of these individuals suddenly go missing, and a number of them we've been able to track back to Saudi Arabia.
So some of the questions I asked you last time, and the answers were some form of, we're looking into that, include, what do we know about what American authorities know about this? What do we know about the sort of financial or sort of socio-political status of these individuals in Saudi Arabia, and sort of to try to understand the contours of what may be going on. What have you learned as your investigation has continued since we last talked about this?
Yeah, a good place to sort of start with that question is to just sort of state out front that what got us looking into these cases originally was a single case here in Portland where we learned that federal law enforcement who looked into a Saudi national here in Portland who disappeared before his manslaughter trial in 2017, federal law enforcement concluded that they believed the Saudi Arabian government had played a role in orchestrating this individual's escape from prosecution. This individual was picked up in a black SUV outside of his home. He cut his ankle monitor, and then federal law enforcement believe he was given an illicit passport and possibly smuggled out of the United States on a private plane. So that's what got us looking into whether or not there are other cases like this one here in Oregon and around the country. And in the last few months, we have now documented nearly 30 cases where similar circumstances have unfolded. And so one of the questions we've been raising from the beginning is whether or not the Saudi Arabian government might be involved in more of these escapes, and also the question of, has the U.S. government known about this? And in answer to your question, our most recent story that came out 2 weeks ago in partnership with ProPublica, the nonprofit investigative news website, who helped us on this most recent story, we found that the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have, since around 2008, known about these Saudi Arabian students disappearing from the United States and had identified Saudi operatives here in the U.S. that had helped a number of these students escape from the U.S.
Is there anything that you've uncovered so far? So, okay, to be clear, American authorities became aware of some of these cases. Presumably, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, we believe after the fact, not as these individuals were facing prosecution.
Correct. What we were able to find is that back in 2008, analysts with the Department of Homeland Security began looking into a number of cases that had come up or come to their attention where Saudi nationals, mostly college students, were charged with crimes and then were disappearing from the United States. So they began looking into this phenomenon and quickly determined that they believed that members of the Saudi Arabian government working through the Saudi Cultural Mission in Washington, D.C., were assisting these suspected criminals, facilitating their escape from the United States. And there was actually a report on this produced by the Department of Homeland Security back in 2008, which they then gave to the FBI. But it appears that that report was never distributed more widely throughout the intelligence community here in the U.S. And what we also learned through our reporting is that this issue has come up time and time again on the radars of federal law enforcement officials in the FBI, Homeland Security. The State Department has been aware of this, yet nobody in the U.S. government has really taken up the issue seriously.
Now, there's no reason to believe at this point in time that there's any American complicity in this, right? Or at least at this point in time, you've not found evidence of that. Is that correct?
Well, what do you mean by complicity?
Well, I don't know. What should I mean? In other words, is there anything you've uncovered so far that suggests that, given that there is no extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia, given that many of these individuals have or are able to get access to resources to get out that don't involve commercial flights and they involve, potentially false passports, do you have any reason to think that American authorities are aware of the potential flight risk of some of these individuals as the cases are unfolding and either look the other way or even potentially assist in getting them out of the country?
That's actually a really great question, David. And I think at this time, we don't have a real clear understanding on that matter. What we can say is that, this has been an issue that's been on the radar of the federal law enforcement for up to a decade. They knew that this was happening. And, it appears that during that time period where a number of these individuals were escaping justice in the United States, the U.S. government never made an issue about it or even confronted the Saudi Arabian government, an ally of the U.S., about this issue.
Do you have, what are the logistics at the sort of individual case level? In other words, do you have reason to believe that the Saudi individuals know in advance that if you get into trouble, here's who you have to call? Is it that, where is the bail money coming from? Are they getting themselves bailed out and later contacting Saudi assistance? Or is this something that the Saudi consulate, for example, might be handling from the beginning? What do you know about those details?
Right. So I think to answer that question, the first thing that we have to sort of point out or illustrate is that there has been a tremendous influx in the number of Saudi students studying in the United States in the last decade plus, starting in about 2005. Most of these students in the U.S. Are recipients of a government scholarship program by the Saudi Arabian government. And one of the things that we learned and kind of had already known about before this latest story came out, but that the Saudi government keeps very close tabs on all of their students who are studying here in the United States. I mean, it appears that through the Saudi Cultural Mission, they sort of have a large surveillance program to keep an eye on students just to make sure that, A, they're staying out of trouble, or that they're not engaging in political activity, or that they're, not talking to the wrong people, et cetera, et cetera. So our understanding is that the Saudi government has pretty close tabs on most of their students, and so are able to find out pretty quickly when some of them have gotten into serious legal trouble. In almost all of the cases that we've documented to date, after an individual gets jailed on suspicion of whatever crime, the Saudi Arabian government, as a policy, and they've told us this explicitly, as a policy, will post the bail money for any individual, any citizen of theirs accused of a crime in the United States, and then also provide money for legal representation, so they don't have a public defender or something like that. So in some of these cases, the Saudis have put up substantial sums of money for these individuals accused of crimes. We're talking six-figure sums of bail money that's put up by various consulates, Saudi consulates here in the U.S. Many of the ones we've looked at here in Oregon, because we've documented a number of cases here, that's come from the closest consulate to us in Oregon is the Saudi Arabian consulate in Los Angeles.
So you mentioned some items that were told to you about how this works from Saudi authorities, but have they answered any direct questions about the fact that some of these individuals are disappearing and evading justice, or have they not answered questions related to that?
It's been a little difficult getting detailed explanations from the Saudi embassy in Washington, which has been sort of our main point of contact throughout this series. But they have sort of given a blanket denial that their government has helped anybody or any Saudi citizen break U.S. laws and escape prosecution in the United States.
Are there any explanations for any parts of this? I mean, in total, it seems very hard that this would apply, but are there any parts of this that if we said, let's be less cynical, skeptical, whatever term you want to apply, that there is some kind of innocent explanation for some parts of this?
Well, I think maybe the most, if we could even call it an innocent explanation, I think it's a matter of maybe there is that the Saudi Arabian government has very little faith in the U.S. Criminal justice system, or there might be a sort of ingrained belief, especially after 9/11, that Arab men in the U.S. who are accused of certain crimes are not going to get a fair shake in the U.S. criminal justice system. And, instead of taking a chance of going to trial and facing years in prison, they're making the decision to help these individuals escape and return to Saudi Arabia. That could be the most innocent explanation, but it would still require a foreign government, an ally of the United States, subverting the U.S. justice system and also violating a number of U.S. and international laws.
Has the Trump administration been presented with this? I know you've been in touch with some senators, and if so, what have they said about it?
Well, at this point in time, it's abundant. It is explicitly clear that the Trump administration does know about our reporting and our findings. Senators in Washington have raised this question multiple times with various agencies in the Trump administration. They've responded finally after ignoring a number of our questions and queries throughout this process, because we've written more than a dozen stories on this now. So they're aware of this. They're aware of our findings, and they're aware that we now know that the U.S. government, prior to the Trump administration, has known about this, both in the George W. Bush administration and under President Barack Obama. However, now that this has been revealed, it's sort of in the Trump administration's court to do something about it or choose not to do anything. And at this point in time, it doesn't appear, based on everything we know, that they're particularly interested in raising this issue.
Yeah, this now starts to get more into Saudi-U.S. relations, but there is this question, which I mentioned, of an extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia, which is not currently in place. Imagining that was put in place, would that mostly preempt the utility of getting these individuals out to Saudi Arabia, or would that only deal with part of the issue?
Well, I think that, the idea of the Saudi Arabian government agreeing to an extradition treaty with the United States is just, not even an idea worth entertaining. It's never going to happen. But clearly, without an extradition treaty, once these individuals are able to get out of the United States and return home, there is really no mechanism in place to have these fugitives brought back to the U.S. unless they end up going to a country where the U.S. has an extradition treaty. Say one of these individuals goes back home to Saudi Arabia and then several years later decides to go on a vacation in Europe somewhere. They could get picked up and extradited back to the U.S. that way. But otherwise, if they get back to Saudi Arabia, for the time being, there seems to be little the U.S. can do if they don't want to apply political or diplomatic pressure on the Saudis. And at the, up until now, they've chosen not to do that.
Yeah, and no indication, as you're suggesting, that piece is going to change anytime soon. Really excellent.
Say more with that point there. I mean, the State Department, in a letter to Senator Ron Wyden, who's a senator from Oregon, who was asking the State Department about all of these Saudis disappearing and returning home. The State Department wrote Wyden a letter a couple of months ago and essentially said that there was nothing that they could do about this. They basically said it was a law enforcement issue, not a diplomatic issue, which is false, because the State Department, there's a number of things the State Department could do on this particular issue. But, the sort of implication from the letter was that they weren't going to do anything.
We've been speaking with Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, staff reporter with the Oregonian in Portland, Oregon. Shane, really appreciate you getting us up to speed and continue the good work on this.
I really appreciate your interest in this issue, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to let you know today that there's an increasingly desperate caravan of people who have decided they simply cannot stay in their home countries anymore. Economic conditions and the sort of realities on the ground are pushing them across the border once and for all from the United States into Canada, where they can hopefully find cheaper healthcare and cheaper medications than in the United States. There was a story some months ago I did about a daily caravan of Americans that crosses the southern border into Mexico for inexpensive but good quality dentistry in Mexico. And I think also it was optometry in addition to dentistry. And there's a new report this week in Newsweek about a so-called caravan, and I'm using the term sort of satirically, people, Americans who are crossing into Canada looking for more affordable health care for type 1 diabetes, because the same drugs that are used to treat diabetes in the United States are used in Canada, and they're much cheaper in Canada. Insulin can be purchased in Canada for about 10% of what it costs in the United States. And as some of you know, since the mid-90s, the price of insulin has increased more than 1,100%, according to data from Truven Health Analytics. But as you also probably know, wages have not increased 1,100% since the mid-90s. And this is, of course, in addition to what most people are paying kind of in total for their health care, which is health insurance premiums and co-pays and uncovered medical expenses, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the FDA is officially taking the position that it is risky to travel outside the United States for insulin because the safety of the insulin might be compromised. The effectiveness of foreign insulin might not be as high. And of course, that could apply to some countries, but in Canada, it's fine. And this is just a truly horrible reality and an optional problem of the system that we have, right? The profit motive and the political impasse has fixed this issue, and it prevents us from actually dealing with it. And it's merely a decision we have to make. I mean, we know exactly how this can be dealt with. These are relatively simple math problems, actuarial problems, and mostly questions of political will. And I guess this is a good opportunity. I mean, while we're at it, I should dispel the notion that healthcare around the world is terrible and unreliable and dangerous. It's not exactly what the FDA is saying when they say you should gotta be really careful if you go anywhere else for insulin. Obviously, there are many places in the world where I would try to avoid having to get healthcare services if traveling or whatever the case may be. But there are so many countries, even countries considered so-called third world or developing countries, often have very good health coverage at very, very reasonable rates. Belize is an example. Belize has plenty of problems. The national income is about 8,000 PPP dollars, purchasing power parity dollars. So we don't even have to get to what that means. Just think about 8,000 US dollars is the sort of national income per person. It's not a rich country, but care is very good. And many Americans retire in Belize partially because they can get good, cheap health care. Argentina, my home country, riddled with problems. I mean, massive economic problems. But at private hospitals and private clinics where you would be paying for care as a visiting American, it is extraordinarily cheap by our standards, and you still get good care. Some of the public hospitals in Argentina, particularly outside of the capital city, not the best. But for what we're used to paying, going to private hospitals in Argentina would be very accessible and very good. Even in Mexico, Mexico is of interest more and more for Americans to retire to and for medical tourism. And a lot of websites now are solely dedicated to how can you legally get resident status in Mexico. It's, of course, very stratified between regions in Mexico in terms of what is available, but really excellent hospitals and care in many parts of the country, including Mexico City. So in any case, the American economy would be better off if Americans didn't feel the need to go to other countries for care, because you'd be keeping those dollars here. You'd be funding people's salaries here in the United States. Fortunately for us, Mexico and Canada are welcoming to people from other countries who come from countries that have third world health insurance systems like we have in the United States, and we know how to fix it, okay? We have plans for how it can be done. We know what it would cost, but we remain stuck in this decades-long, I mean, it's really like a century-long impasse, which dates back to the period between World War I and World War II, where we were starting to go in the direction of a more European model on healthcare. And then that idea was smeared as being too much like Germany at a time when we weren't getting along with Germany, for good reasons, by the way. And it's been downhill ever since. And you know where we are today in 2019. But at least Canada is there for type 1 diabetes sufferers to go and get inexpensive and still reliable quality insulin. This is an interesting story that I thought I'd bring up with you today. There's been a debate recently over the claim that Elizabeth Warren predicted the 2008 financial crisis before it happened. And most of the focus on this story has been on the wrong thing. Most of the focus has been on determining, did Elizabeth Warren predict the financial crisis, or did she not actually predict the financial crisis? But I don't actually think that that's the right argument at all to be having. I'll tell you the facts first, and then I'll tell you why I think the entire conversation is being framed incorrectly. 2020 Democratic candidate Elizabeth Warren did a CNN town hall. And one of the things that she said was that she predicted the 2008 financial crisis. She said, quote, "And starting in the early 2000s, the crisis was coming. I was waving my arms, ringing the bell, doing everything I could. I said families are getting cheated all over this country. It started when the mortgage companies targeted communities of color. They targeted seniors. They targeted Latinos. They came in and sold the worst possible mortgages and stripped wealth out of those communities and then took those products across the nation. I went everywhere I could. I talked about it to anyone who would listen. A crisis is coming." So is this true that she did this? Basically, it is. Okay. Before 2008, Elizabeth Warren was talking about the impending housing and financial crisis. In her 2003 book, she talked about it, subprime lending and housing crisis. In 2004 on PBS, she said that the growing household debt, the growing number of risky mortgage lending practices are causing a problem. In 2005, she told the New York Times that the amount of home equity debt that homeowners were getting into was a big red flag. And PolitiFact looked at this and determined, yes, Elizabeth Warren did predict the financial crisis. But here's my reaction. So what? Elizabeth Warren did predict the financial crisis, but why is that a big deal? Tons of people predicted it. Tons are predicting another crisis now, and none of it is even remotely notable or requires special insight to predict. What I mean by that is, obviously, our economic system and circumstances are not sustainable. Of course, there's always a financial crisis or a major downturn somewhere on the horizon. The question is it a year away or 4 years away or 8 years away? I don't know how notable it is that Elizabeth Warren predicted something that anyone who understands the boom and bust cycles of our economic system has been predicting as a matter of fact for decades, or for as long as they've been following the economy. These boom bust cycles are implicit and inherent to the economic system that we have. They're always on the horizon. The question is just when. So one of the reactions to this entire Elizabeth Warren thing has been, well, we would care about whether she did or didn't predict it, because we should want a president who has the foresight to predict when the next crisis will be. Well, okay, that may be, but anybody who understands how the economy works should understand that there's always a looming crisis on the horizon. There's always a looming downturn on the horizon because it's implicit to the system we have. The vulture capitalist cycles of boom and bust that increase inequality and increase despair don't happen less frequently unless we actually deal with the problems inherent to the system that we have. So Elizabeth Warren predicted it. Tons of people predicted it. And anybody who understands our system understands that such a crisis is always on the horizon. It's great that Elizabeth Warren is actually talking about it, but having the foresight to predict it is actually not notable, although I'm glad that it is getting more attention. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. One of the frequent David Pakman Show bingo terms that some people pay attention to is related to me mentioning that I worked at Circuit City when I was in high school and college. And the Eggman claims to have won David Pakman Show bingo on the basis of me recently mentioning Circuit City on the bonus show. Take a listen.
Bingo. Hey, Dave, remember we made those David Pakman bingo cards and you put down phrases that Dave would say? You know, oh, we'll have to delete this or we'll edit this out, you know, that every podcaster says every time Dave says this, right? Well, one of the things on my bingo card was Circuit City, or when I worked at Circuit City, and I've been waiting for another one of those ever since, and you just hit me, so I just got bingo. Oh, Dave, shalom, brother, I love you.
Yeah, you know, I actually don't think I mentioned Circuit City that often. Most people still, when I look at comments, are very surprised that I ever worked at Circuit City, but I did. And I was in the President's Club. I was one of the top salespeople at Circuit City, and I got a free trip to Orlando, Florida. It's actually a true story. It wasn't the best trip, I will admit, but it was a trip nonetheless. On today's bonus show, we will talk about a new report related to urban congestion pricing. It turns out that people who live in cities that implement congestion pricing don't like it, but then they get over it very quickly, and it actually does help deal with congestion. We will also talk about a Texas bartender who has been charged for serving a gunman before that gunman went on a mass shooting. And it is a very interesting case from a legal perspective. We'll also just talk about the kind of common sense elements of it. And in Rhode Island, students who owe lunch money will get only jelly sandwiches until their debt is paid. We will talk about that new policy and much more. Get instant access, not delayed access, instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.